She walked into the apartment building with her grocery bags held tight, eyes low, trying to ignore the whispers that followed her. The scar running from her jaw to her collarbone always drew attention, but today the laughter felt louder. Two women near the mailboxes smirked, one of them whispering just loud enough, "Who even lets someone like her live here?" She didn't reply. She just pushed back her hair, hiding the scar as best she could, and kept moving. But before she reached the stairs, a sharp voice echoed across the hall. "Hey, you can't bring those inside. This is a community building, not a shelter." It was Mrs. Clark, the self-proclaimed head of their HOA. She stood tall in her fake authority, arms crossed like she owned every brick. Without waiting for a response, she slapped a paper onto the elevator door saying, "Violation notice, unsanitary conduct." The woman with the scar froze. "I just bought groceries," she said quietly. Mrs. Clark scoffed. "Don't talk back. People like you don't follow rules. This isn't some charity housing." The others laughed again. Someone pulled out a phone, recording her like she was entertainment. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from trying not to let anger win. She took the stairs instead, each step heavy, but she didn't argue. She never did. What no one noticed was the small tattoo on her wrist exposed when her sleeve slipped, a faded military unit mark, barely seen under the grocery bag strap. One man, leaning by the vending machine, did notice, a quiet veteran who just moved into the building. His eyes widened. He didn't laugh. He didn't look away. He just whispered to himself, "No way. That unit was classified." And in that moment, everything shifted. But no one else knew it yet. By the time she reached her apartment door, her hands were numb from the weight of the bags and all the stairs. She fumbled with the keys, but before she could unlock it, her neighbor across the hall opened his door. He was the same man from downstairs, the quiet veteran with calm eyes. "You all right?" he asked gently. She hesitated. "I'm fine, just tired." She tried to smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. His gaze drifted to her wrist again, to that tattoo she kept trying to hide. "Where did you get that mark?" he asked quietly, almost like he wasn't sure he should. She quickly tugged her sleeve down. "It doesn't matter." But his voice turned serious. "It does if it's from where I think it is. I served in Kandahar, and only one special unit carried that symbol. Most of them didn't make it back." Her hand froze on the doorknob. Before she could answer, loud footsteps echoed from the hallway. Mrs. Clark had followed them up with a smug smile and two of her HOA assistants behind her holding clipboards like weapons. "I need to see inside your unit," she demanded. "We got complaints about bad smell and unsafe living conditions." The woman with the scar turned around slowly. "There's no complaint. You're making this up." Mrs. Clark stepped closer, voice cold. "I have the authority to inspect any unit I find suspicious, and yours is suspicious." The veteran stepped between them. "You don't have that authority," he said calmly. "You can't enter her home without consent or a legal order." Mrs. Clark's smile thinned. "And who are you to tell me the rules?" He didn't raise his voice. "Someone who actually knows them." But Mrs. Clark didn't back down. "If she doesn't let me in by tonight, I'm filing a report to have her removed from the building. People like her bring down property value." The scarred woman's fingers tightened around her keys. Her voice was soft but steady when she said, "You think I'm alone in this?" Mrs. Clark just smirked and walked away. "You'll be gone by morning." The hallway fell silent. The veteran looked at her, jaw clenched. "You don't have to fight this alone." She looked up at him for the first time, her eyes tired but fierce. "You don't know what you're getting into." He shook his head. "No, I know exactly who you are." And for the first time in years, she felt a chill. Not from fear, but from being seen. Night settled over the building, but no one felt calm. Inside her small apartment, she sat on the edge of her couch, staring at the crumpled violation notice in her hand.
Every word on it felt like a warning. Outside her door, voices from the hallway drifted in. Laughter, whispers, her name spoken like it was dirt. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breath. A soft knock broke the silence. She hesitated but opened the door. The veteran stood there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Figured you couldn't either." She didn't argue and let him in. The place was neat, quiet, nothing like what Mrs. Clark claimed. He looked around and nodded. "Exactly what I thought. She's lying." She sat across from him, the steam from the coffee fogging the space between them. He leaned forward. "I need to know, that tattoo, is it from Task Force Orion?" Her eyes widened at the name, something she hadn't heard in years. "How do you know that?" His voice dropped. "My unit worked with them once. We heard stories about a medic who saved an entire convoy during the ambush in Helmand, dragged people out of burning trucks, didn't leave until everyone was out. They said she disappeared after the blast, assumed dead." She looked away, her fingers brushing unconsciously over her scar. "I didn't disappear. I just didn't want to be found." Before he could speak again, harsh pounding rattled the door. Mrs. Clark's voice cut through the air. "Open up! I'm giving you one last chance before I call the authorities and have you removed tonight." The veteran stood up. "She can't do that. It's illegal." But Mrs. Clark continued, louder. "Or maybe I should tell them about your violent behavior. People saw you threatening me today. You think they'll believe a damaged woman over me?" A cold silence followed. The woman with the scar stood up slowly, shoulders straight. "She wants a fight," she whispered. "She doesn't know I've been in worse." The veteran clenched his jaw. "Then let's not give her what she wants. Let's give her something she never saw coming." She nodded, a quiet fire in her eyes. And in that moment, something changed. Not outside in the hallway, but inside the room. Like a storm forming before anyone notices the sky has darkened. Outside, Mrs. Clark walked away with a satisfied smirk. Inside, the real war was just beginning.
Morning came, but it didn't bring peace. A bright orange paper was now taped across her door. Final eviction notice, 24 hours to vacate. Neighbors stared as they passed, pretending not to. Some even took photos. Mrs. Clark stood near the lobby, holding a clipboard like a trophy, smiling every time someone looked at the notice. The woman with the scar pulled the paper down slowly. Her hands didn't shake this time. The veteran was already waiting near the mailboxes. "She moved fast," he muttered. "She thinks I won't fight back," she replied, folding the notice and slipping it in her pocket. "She thinks I'm weak." He glanced around, lowering his voice. "I made some calls last night. I still have friends, legal ones, not the kind she plays with. If we do this smart, we can stop her and expose her." She looked at him carefully. "Why are you helping me?" He hesitated. "Because the woman who saved lives on the battlefield doesn't deserve to be pushed out of her own home by someone who only fights with paper and lies." Before she could answer, a scream came from outside the building. They rushed out to see a tow truck hooked to her old pickup truck. Mrs. Clark stood beside it, arms crossed. "This vehicle has been parked for too long without proper registration. I'm having it towed," she said loudly, making sure people heard. "That's my truck," the scarred woman stepped forward, voice sharp. "Not anymore," Mrs. Clark smirked. "Maybe sell your story somewhere and buy a new one." The veteran moved beside her, calm but dangerous. "Touch that truck and you'll regret it." Mrs. Clark's smile widened, as if she'd been waiting for this. "Are you threatening me? Good, I have that recorded." One of her assistants held up a phone, already filming. The scarred woman felt something snap inside, memories of burning sand, alarms, and screaming soldiers. But she didn't lose control. Instead, she took a quiet breath. Then she whispered, "Go ahead, film this too." She walked to the back of the truck, pulled off a dusty metal box hidden under the tailgate. She opened it just enough for the veteran to see. Old military tags, a folded flag, and a badge with a seal most people wouldn't recognize.
The veteran's eyes widened. "You kept it." Mrs. Clark frowned. "What is that?" The woman finally turned to her. "Proof." Mrs. Clark rolled her eyes. "Proof of what? That you're dramatic?" The woman stepped closer, voice cold and steady. "Proof that this land, this truck, this home is protected under Federal Service Housing Law, Section 530, and you just ordered a tow on a veteran's property." Mrs. Clark blinked, her confidence fading for the first time. People stopped watching. Phones stopped recording. The veteran looked at her, not with surprise, but with respect. She closed the box. "You wanted a fight. Now you'll get one. But by the rules you pretend to know." And with that, the real tide began to turn. She watched the two men in uniform step off the tow truck like the end of the world had arrived. One of them barked, "You need to step aside. We're removing this vehicle on official order." Mrs. Clark smiled like she owned the sky. The scarred woman's stomach turned, but the veteran didn't move. He walked up slowly, looked the men in the eye, and said, "Badge numbers and agency, please." One of the men fumbled with a wallet and pulled out a shiny badge that looked real from a distance. The other kept his hand on the truck. "We have an order," he repeated. "Stand down." The veteran didn't raise his voice. He reached into his jacket, and for a second she thought he might be pulling a gun. He didn't. He pulled out a laminated card and a phone. "Those aren't police," he said calmly. "They're contracted security. You need to show a warrant for a tow." He tapped his phone, and a recorded voicemail played loud. Mrs. Clark's voice, clear as day, calling the tow company and saying, "Make sure her truck's gone before noon. I don't want witnesses." The hallway went dead silent. Mrs. Clark's face went white for the first time. She started, "You lied to everyone," the veteran said. "You used people to make a show. You called this a community issue so neighbors would cheer." His voice was low. "You don't get to bully people because you own a clipboard." The fake officers glared, then backed away. One of them muttered into his sleeve, and the man with the tow phone said, "We won't take it without a legal order." Cameras lifted from phones like a tide. People who'd laughed now watched. Someone shouted, "Call the real police!" Mrs. Clark tried to move fast, pulling a paper from her purse and waving it like proof. The veteran stepped forward and took it, scanning it with his thumb. He frowned. "This is a forged HOA letter," he said. "The seal is wrong. Who notarized this?" He held it up where everyone could see. She stammered, "It's standard procedure." "Standard for liars," the veteran answered. Then he did something no one expected. He showed his own badge. It belonged to the county sheriff's reserve. People gasped. He didn't shout it. He simply said, "I'm allowed to file a complaint for impersonation and harassment. I already spoke to Captain Reyes. She's en route." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mrs. Clark's assistant, who had been filming the whole time, suddenly looked terrified. She shoved her phone in her pocket and tried to step between Mrs. Clark and the door. "We have witnesses," she whispered. "No," the veteran said, quiet and hard. "You have people who are going to tell the truth." He looked at the scarred woman and nodded. She felt something like cold fire in her chest, anger and a fierce calm braided together. "Let them come," she said. "If you want to play law, play by it." Across the hall, a neighbor yelled that real sirens were coming. But before anyone could breathe, Mrs. Clark lunged forward and grabbed the forged letter back. Her hand closed like a last-ditch grab for control. The veteran grabbed her wrist, gentle but firm, and his face changed. Old commands in his eyes, a pressure that said he'd been in worse fights and won. "Don't run," he told her. "You already gave us everything we need." Her eyes flashed with something ugly, panic or pride. "You'll ruin me," she hissed. He smiled, not cruelly, but with a kind of finality. "You already ruined yourself." Phones streamed, doors opened. The building that had laughed at her a day ago now waited, ready to watch what came next. The real police cars pulled up, sirens off, but lights flashing against the brick walls like a quiet warning. Neighbors crowded on balconies and doorways, whispering, recording, waiting to see if this was finally the moment Mrs. Clark would lose. The scarred woman stood beside her truck while the veteran stood a step ahead, shoulders squared, calm like he'd been here before, just a different battlefield. Two officers stepped forward. One of them, a tall woman with sharp eyes, walked straight to the veteran. "Deputy Marshal Carter?" she asked. He nodded. "Thanks for coming, Captain Reyes." Mrs. Clark blinked, eyes wide. You called federal officers?" Captain Reyes didn't even look at her. She turned to the scarred woman. "Ma'am, are you the resident of this unit?" "Yes," she answered quietly. The captain's gaze softened slightly. "We received a report of property harassment, impersonation of law enforcement, and illegal eviction attempts. Is that correct?" Before she could respond, Mrs. Clark jumped in. "This is a misunderstanding. I'm the HOA president. I have every right to." Captain Reyes finally turned to her. "Are you a licensed law enforcement officer?" Mrs. Clark's lips trembled. "No, but—" "And did you authorize private security to act as police officers and attempt to remove this woman's vehicle?" Mrs. Clark looked around like she was drowning and no one was jumping in to save her. I was just enforcing community rules." Reyes nodded to one of her officers. "Get statements from the witnesses." The veteran stepped closer. "There's more," he said quietly. He handed over the forged eviction letter, the audio recording, and pointed to the cameras on the building that had caught everything. Mrs. Clark's assistant tried to step back, but another officer stopped her. Her face fell. Reyes glanced at the scarred woman. "Do you want to press charges?" Silence fell. Everyone watched her, waiting, tense. She looked at Mrs. Clark. This woman who had humiliated her, laughed at her scars, tried to take her home. Her voice came out low but steady. "I don't want revenge. I want her to stop. I want my life back." Reyes nodded. "Understood, but crimes were committed and charges will be filed." She turned to Mrs. Clark. "You're under investigation for harassment, falsifying legal documents, and impersonating authority." Mrs. Clark's face twisted. "You have no idea who I am. My husband—" Captain Reyes didn't blink. "Your husband isn't here. I am." One officer gently took Mrs. Clark by the arm, not cuffing her yet, but not letting her run either. Neighbors held their breath. Right then, a small voice spoke up from the crowd, an elderly man who'd always avoided conflict. She told us if we didn't agree with her, she'd get us evicted too." And suddenly, others began speaking. Words tumbled out, fear, stories, things they'd been too afraid to say before. Mrs. Clark stood frozen, surrounded by truth she couldn't control. The scarred woman exhaled, slow, like she'd been holding that breath for years. The veteran looked at her and said, quietly but clearly, "This is your land. No one takes it from you again." And for the first time, she believed it. For the first time in months, the building felt quiet. Not the cold kind of quiet filled with whispers and judgment, but the kind that comes after a storm. Mrs. Clark was taken downtown for questioning. Her assistants were giving shaky statements to the officers. The forged papers, the fake notices, the threats, it was all out in the open now. No one laughed at the scarred woman anymore. She stood beside her truck with the veteran, watching the officers drive away. The sun was low in the sky, turning the windows golden. Neighbors lingered outside, unsure whether to walk over or stay back. A few offered small nods, some even whispered apologies. She didn't say much, just nodded in return. The veteran leaned against the truck. "You handled it better than most generals I've seen," he said, half smiling. She shook her head. "I didn't do anything. You did." "No," he said quietly. "You stood your ground when everyone tried to push you out. That's not nothing." She looked down, brushing a thumb over the metal box still in her hands. Inside were her medals, the folded flag, and the badge she hadn't shown anyone in years. "I didn't want this," she whispered. I just wanted a normal life. No attention, no war, just quiet. I know, he said, but some people don't let others have peace. They mistake silence for weakness. She looked at him then. And you? Why did you stay? He hesitated for a moment, then said, because I know what it's like to come home and still feel like you're fighting to survive. Before she could answer, a black SUV pulled into the parking lot. A middle-aged man in a tailored suit stepped out. Some neighbors gasped. This was Mr. Clarkson, Mrs. Clark's husband, a local real estate investor with deep pockets and a cold smile. He didn't look at the neighbors. He walked straight to her and the veteran. "Where is my wife?" he asked sharply. "At the station," the veteran replied. Mr. Clarkson's eyes narrowed. "This is a mistake. My lawyers will fix it. And you," he turned to the scarred woman, "should start packing. With the HOA vote finalized last night, your lease is terminated." The veteran stepped forward, but she raised a hand stopping him. She looked at Mr. Clarkson calmly. "You still don't get it," she said. "This isn't about your HOA anymore." He scoffed. "It's always about it. These people will follow anyone who looks confident enough to lead. My wife did, and now I will." She opened the metal box and pulled out a worn document with federal seals, the housing protection orders issued to decorated service members injured in the line of duty. She held it out for him to see. "This apartment is protected under federal law. I'm not leaving. Not today, not ever because you say so." For a split second, his confident mask cracked. She stepped closer, voice low. "Your wife tried to take everything from me with lies and power she didn't have. You want to try again? Do it in front of the same cameras that caught her." Phones were already lifted. Neighbors were already recording. Mr. Clarkson's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He turned, got back into his SUV, and drove off without another word. The veteran looked at her. "That was your line," he said softly. "The one people don't forget." She didn't smile, not yet, but her shoulders finally relaxed. Above them, lights flickered on in the hallway windows, one by one. For the first time, they weren't watching her with hate. They were watching with respect. And the story wasn't over yet. Only now, she wasn't the only one standing. The next morning felt different. There was no orange notice on her door, no whispers trailing her down the hallway. The air felt lighter, as if the building itself had exhaled after holding its breath too long. She stepped outside with a mug of coffee, still half expecting someone to stop her. Instead, Mrs. Alvarez from 2B walked by and softly said, "If you ever need help with groceries again, just knock." No pity in her voice, only honesty. Others waved, awkward but sincere. Some even helped pull Mrs. Clark's fake HOA signs off the lobby walls. Inside the leasing office, Captain Reyes met with the landlord. Papers were signed, recordings handed over. The fake eviction, the forged documents, the impersonation, all now official charges. Mrs. Clark was still being processed. Mr. Clarkson hadn't returned. The veteran stood by the entrance, arms crossed, watching quietly. He didn't say much until she came over. "It's over," she said. He shook his head. "No, it just stopped hurting." She didn't argue. She knew what he meant. Some wounds don't bleed on the outside. They walked to her truck. He helped her place the metal box gently behind the seat. The folded flag sat on top. For the first time, she didn't hide it. "You ever think of rejoining them?" he asked suddenly. She looked at him confused. Rejoining who? He held her gaze. "People who understand. People who don't laugh at scars." "I left that life behind," she whispered. He nodded. "Maybe, but it never left you." A silence settled between them. Not heavy, just real. Then a door swung open behind them. A teenage kid from the third floor ran out, holding a phone. "They're saying on the news that Mrs. Clark might face federal charges. Everyone's talking about you two." She sighed. "That's the last thing I want." The veteran glanced at her wrist, where the faded tattoo showed again. "Maybe it's not about what you want anymore," he said gently. "Maybe it's about who needs to see it." She looked at the building, the same place she once tried to disappear inside. Now, people watched her with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Trust, respect. She turned to the veteran. "So, what now?" He gave a small, tired smile. "Now, you live. In your own home, on your own land, without asking permission." She thought for a moment, then whispered the words like a promise, to herself more than anyone. "I didn't fight for this country to be told I can't live in my own home." He nodded slowly. "That's the line they'll remember." The wind brushed against her scar. It still hurts sometimes, but it didn't burn like before. The cameras went off. The crowd drifted away. The world felt quiet again. But this time, it was the kind of quiet she chose. And for once, it felt like peace.